Commander Jin Seo-yun stood before the massive doors of the ethereal conclave chamber. The space station stretched beyond her vision, in all directions, its crystalline walls pulsing with ancient energy. She had prepared for this moment for months, but nothing could have readied her for the sheer scale of galactic power that surrounded her. The doors opened with a sound like distant thunder. Inside, the chamber rose in terraced levels that disappeared into misty heights. Beings from 1,000 worlds filled the seats, their forms ranging from graceful energy patterns to hulking metal constructs. At the center sat the Elder Council, creatures so old that entire civilizations had risen and fallen during their lifetimes. Ambassador Park Min-jun walked beside Jin, his diplomatic robes feeling inadequate in this place of cosmic authority. He had warned her that the elders viewed humanity as children barely worthy of notice. Now she understood why. Elder Vorthak dominated the central throne, his crystalline form shifting between solid matter and pure light. When he spoke, his voice resonated through dimensions that human ears could barely perceive. The species called humans requests consideration for protected status within our galactic community, Vorthak announced. His tone carried the weight of someone discussing an interesting but ultimately trivial matter. They arrive from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star, having achieved primitive space travel mere decades ago. Laughter rippled through the chamber. Not cruel laughter, but the gentle amusement adults might show when children played at being grown-ups. Jin felt her jaw tighten, but forced herself to remain calm. Counselor Thys, a reptilian saurian whose scales gleamed like polished emeralds, leaned forward in her seat. What achievements do these humans claim that might interest the Council? What technologies have they mastered? What worlds have they conquered? Jin stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. Honored counselors, humanity offers not conquest, but cooperation. We have learned to resolve conflicts through understanding rather than force. Our greatest achievement is not the domination of others, but the ability to find common ground between different peoples. The laughter grew louder. Vorthak's form brightened with what seemed to be amusement. They speak of avoiding conflict, as if it were a virtue. Tell us, young human, how does your species handle those who threaten your existence? We try to understand why they threaten us, Jin replied. We look for solutions that protect everyone, not just ourselves. We believe that true strength comes from building bridges, not burning them. The chamber erupted in delighted laughter. Even the dignified energy beings seemed to flicker with mirth. Vorthak raised a hand that sparkled like captured starlight. How refreshingly naive, he said. Your elders speak of some imagined fury that drives your species. But we see only soft creatures who weep at the necessity of violence. You have existed for mere moments in galactic terms, yet you presume to teach wisdom to civilizations that ruled the stars before your son was born. Park Min-jun stepped forward, his diplomatic training taking over. With respect, Elder Vorthak, humanity has survived many challenges on our homeworld. We have overcome differences between our own people that once seemed impossible to bridge. Perhaps our perspective, while young, offers value precisely because it is different. Thys's laugh was like the hissing of steam. Different, yes. Weak, certainly. You speak of bridging differences as if the strong should lower themselves to accommodate the weak. The natural order demands that the superior rule and the inferior serve. This is the foundation of galactic peace. Jin felt something cold settle in her stomach. This was not going as any of their preparation had suggested it might. Counselor Thys, with respect, we have found that systems built on dominance eventually collapse. Those who are forced to serve will always seek freedom. True peace comes from willing cooperation, not enforced submission. The laughter stopped abruptly. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Vorthak's form solidified into something more clearly threatening. Child, he said, his voice now carrying undertones of genuine annoyance. You speak of matters beyond your comprehension. We have maintained galactic order for millions of years. Countless species have brought their primitive philosophies before this council. Believing their brief existence had taught them universal truths. They learned otherwise. What happened to them? Jin asked, though part of her already knew she would not like the answer. They were educated, Thys replied, her smile revealing teeth like crystalline daggers. Some learned to accept their proper place, others chose isolation rather than wisdom. A few required more direct instruction in the nature of reality. Park Min-jun's face had gone pale. Jin realized that their intelligence reports had not prepared them for this. Humanity had expected to encounter an advanced but reasonable galactic community. They had not anticipated a cosmic empire built on the systematic suppression of any species that dared to question the established order. You seem troubled, young human, Vorthak observed. Perhaps you begin to understand that your species' emotional responses are precisely what make you unfit for independent existence. You feel distress when confronted with necessary realities. You experience confusion when your limited worldview encounters actual wisdom. Jin looked around the chamber, seeing the faces of 1,000 species. Some watched with obvious sympathy, but their expressions also carried resignation and fear. Others seemed genuinely amused by humanity's presumption. But all of them, she realized, were trapped in this system just as surely as Earth was about to be. The Council has reached its decision, Vorthak announced. The species known as humans will be granted protected status under the supervision of the Zeltharian Commonwealth. Your worlds will be administered for your own benefit. Your technological development will be guided to prevent dangerous experimentation. Your population will be regulated to ensure optimal resource utilization. You're talking about making us slaves, Jin said quietly. We prefer the term responsible stewardship, Thys replied. You will find that acceptance of reality brings peace. Resistance brings only suffering. And ultimately, the same result. As Jin and Park Min-jun were escorted from the chamber, she heard Vorthak speaking to his fellow elders. Another species learns its place in the natural order. Their emotional instability makes them unsuitable for self-governance, but they may prove useful for labor-intensive operations. We shall monitor their adjustment to supervision. Walking through the crystalline corridors back to their diplomatic quarters, Park Min-jun spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. They never intended to treat us as equals. This entire process was just a formality. Jin nodded, her mind already working through implications and possibilities. They think our emotions make us weak. They think our desire for peace makes us helpless. They think they understand what humanity is capable of. Don't they? Park asked. Jin smiled. But there was nothing pleasant about the expression. No, Ambassador. They have no idea what they've just awakened. 3 months had passed since the Council's decision, and Dr. Lee Heejin felt her eyes burning from staring at ancient galactic archives for 16 hours straight. The Conclave's library was vast beyond human comprehension, containing the recorded history of thousands of civilizations, spanning millions of years. What she had discovered in those records made her hands shake as she compiled her findings. The pattern was there, hidden in language designed to obscure rather than reveal. Species after species had simply chosen isolation, or decided to focus on internal development after conflicts with the Elder Council. The Veil Three had been granted autonomy in a distant sector after questioning Elder taxation policies. The Morvani had elected to pursue a path of peaceful contemplation, following their protests against mandatory resource quotas. The Zenthali had embraced a simpler way of life after their leaders demanded representation in galactic governance. But Lee had learned to read between the lines. Archive entries that mentioned administrative adjustments in these species' territories were followed by records of sudden population declines. References to cultural preservation efforts preceded the dismantling of their technological infrastructure. Protective relocation, meant the systematic destruction of anything that might threaten elder supremacy. She was not the only one making disturbing discoveries. Commander Jin So-yoon had been quietly establishing communication networks among human colonies across the galaxy. What she learned painted an even darker picture of their current reality. On New Busan, the orbital manufacturing station where Captain Kim Do-hyun had been reassigned, elder supervisors had begun implementing efficiency improvements. Human workers found their shift lengths doubled, their rest periods eliminated, and their food rations reduced to bare subsistence levels. When workers petitioned for better conditions, the elder administrator dismissed their concerns as typical emotional overreaction from a species not yet adapted to productive labor. Similar reports came from every human settlement. On Terra Nova, families were being separated for optimal work placement. Children above the age of 10 were removed for educational opportunities that their parents were not permitted to visit. On Harmony Station, humans attempting to maintain their cultural practices were punished for non-productive activities that interfere with assigned duties. Jin compiled these reports in her secure communications center aboard the Conclave station. Her diplomatic immunity, providing the only safe space for coordination. Each message that arrived painted the picture more clearly. Humanity was not being protected or guided. They were being systematically broken down into compliant labor units. The breaking point came when news reached them of the incident at Haven Colony. The settlement had been established as a farming world, providing agricultural products for the Galactic Trade Network. When crop yields fell short of elder projections due to unexpected weather patterns, the human colonists requested additional resources and time to adjust their methods. The elder response had been swift and brutal. Orbital bombardment destroyed the colony's primary settlements. Survivors were relocated to labor camps in other systems. The official report described it as necessary correction of productivity shortfalls and elimination of management inefficiencies. 3,000 humans had died for the crime of failing to exceed impossible quotas while adapting to an alien world. Jin received the reports while sitting in her quarters, reading dispatches that Ambassador Park Min-jun had smuggled through diplomatic channels. The clinical language could not hide the reality of what had happened. She was still staring at the screen when her door chimed. Captain Kim Do-hyun stood in the corridor, still wearing his work coveralls from the manufacturing station. His presence here was dangerous for both of them, but the expression on his face told her he had made the same decision she was contemplating. "You've heard about Haven," he said without preamble. 3 hours ago, Jin replied. "How many others know?" "Word is spreading. The elder supervisors think we're too primitive to communicate effectively between stations, so they haven't bothered to restrict our basic communications. Every human in the galaxy will know within a week." Jin gestured for him to enter her quarters. "And how do you think they'll react to that knowledge?" Kim's smile was grim. "The same way any human would react to watching their children murdered for failing to meet impossible demands. The elders think our emotions make us weak. They're about to learn how wrong they are." As if summoned by their conversation, Dr. Lee appeared at Jin's door. Her usual scholarly composure had been replaced by something much harder and more determined. "I've finished analyzing the historical patterns," she said as she entered. Every species that challenged the elders followed the same path. Initial resistance, brutal suppression, gradual extermination disguised as administrative policy. We have perhaps 6 months before they begin the final phase. "What makes you so certain?" Jin asked. Lee activated her portable display, showing a timeline that made Jin's blood run cold. Population reduction follows a predictable schedule. First, they eliminate leadership through administrative corrections. Then, they separate families to prevent organized resistance. Finally, they begin efficiency improvements that gradually reduce the subject population to nothing. Haven Colony was the first administrative correction, Kim said quietly. "And the family separations have already begun," Jin added. The three of them stood in silence for a moment, each understanding that they were discussing treason against the most powerful empire in galactic history, an empire that had crushed every previous resistance with casual efficiency. The other species that tried to resist, Jin finally asked. What did they do wrong? Lee consulted her notes. They followed predictable patterns. They attempted to match elder military strength, which was impossible. They tried to negotiate from positions of weakness, which the elders interpreted as opportunities for greater exploitation. They fought the way the elders expected them to fight, which was, like civilized galactic citizens, using accepted methods of warfare, following established protocols, seeking support through official channels. They played by rules designed to ensure their defeat. Kim leaned back against the wall, his expression thoughtful. What if we don't play by those rules? Explain. Jin said. The elders see us as primitive and emotional. They think our lack of advanced technology makes us harmless. They believe our desire for cooperation makes us incapable of effective resistance. Kim's voice grew stronger as he spoke. What if those assumptions are exactly what we need to defeat them? Lee nodded slowly. A species that appears harmless can move freely through systems designed to control dangerous threats. Beings considered too emotional for strategic thinking won't be monitored for strategic planning. A civilization dismissed as technologically primitive won't be watched for technological innovation. You're talking about using their prejudices against them, Jin realized. I'm talking about being exactly what we are, Kim replied. Humans who refuse to accept that might makes right. People who believe that cooperation is stronger than domination. A species that can adapt to any environment, including one designed to destroy us. Jin felt something shifting in her mind, a strategic clarity she had not experienced since her military training decades ago. The elders had made a fundamental error in their assessment of humanity. They saw weakness where humans saw strength. They saw primitiveness where humans saw adaptability. They saw emotional instability where humans saw moral certainty. We'll need to coordinate across every human settlement in the galaxy, she said. Without using any communication methods the elders will recognize as strategic planning, Lee added, while maintaining the appearance of complete compliance with their administrative systems, Kim concluded. They looked at each other. 3 humans in a galaxy controlled by beings who considered them barely sentient. The task before them seemed impossible. The likely consequences of failure would be the extinction of their entire species. But for the first time since the Council's decision, Jin felt hope stirring in her chest. The elders had no idea what they were dealing with. They thought they understood human nature based on a few diplomatic meetings and superficial observation. They were about to learn how little they actually knew about the species they had just sentenced to death. 6 months after the Haven Colony massacre, Admiral Choi Sung-min found himself working as a maintenance supervisor on Orbital Platform 7, cataloging spare parts for elder machinery. To any observer, he appeared to be exactly what the elders expected. A broken military leader, reduced to menial labor, his spirit crushed by the reality of human helplessness. The elders were very pleased with this apparent confirmation of their theories about human nature. They had no idea that Choi was coordinating the largest resistance operation in galactic history. The beauty of the plan lay in its invisible simplicity. Humans across the galaxy had stopped protesting, stopped complaining, stopped showing any signs of the emotional instability that had marked their early interactions with elder authority. They worked their assigned jobs with quiet efficiency. They followed orders without question. They appeared to have accepted their place in the galactic order. Elder Vorthak had publicly congratulated his fellow counselors on the successful integration of humanity into productive galactic society. As predicted, he announced during a council session, the application of appropriate pressure has eliminated their disruptive tendencies. They now function as useful components of our civilizational machinery. What Vorthak did not know was that every human in the galaxy was following a carefully coordinated script designed by Commander Jin So-yun and distributed through channels that the elders could not detect because they had never bothered to understand how human communication actually worked. The plan exploited every assumption the elders had made about human limitations. They believed humans were too emotional for long-term strategic thinking. In reality, human emotional intelligence allowed them to read elder psychology with devastating accuracy. Choi had spent months studying the behavioral patterns of his elder supervisors, learning to predict their responses with mathematical precision. When Elder Administrator Zephys inspected the maintenance schedules, Choi knew exactly which submissive gestures would reinforce Zephys's sense of superiority and cause him to lower his guard. They believed human technology was too primitive to pose a threat. In reality, human adaptability meant they could improvise solutions using resources the elders never considered strategically relevant. Dr. Lee Hee-jin had discovered that elder computer systems, despite their vast sophistication, had never been designed to recognize certain types of data patterns. Information encoded in formats that appeared to be maintenance logs or inventory reports could carry complex instructions across the galactic communication network without triggering any security protocols. They believed humans were too individualistic to coordinate effectively. In reality, human social bonds operated on levels that the ancient, isolated elders could not comprehend. Captain Kim Do-hyun had established networks that used shared memories, cultural references, and emotional connections to create communication channels that were invisible to beings who had forgotten what community meant. The coordination was perfect because it appeared to be non-existent. On factory ship Kepler, engineer Park Ji-won had spent months learning the optimal operation cycles of the industrial fabricators. Her elder supervisors praised her dedication to efficiency. They did not realize she was memorizing every detail of the systems that kept their civilization functioning. On Agricultural Station series, Farmer Jung-min Ho had become an expert in the dietary requirements of 17 different alien species. His productivity reports impressed elder administrators who saw his success as proof that humans could be valuable servants. They did not understand that he was identifying the most effective methods to disrupt galactic food distribution networks. On Communications Hub Proxima, technician Oh Soo-jin had earned commendations for her ability to maintain elder quantum relay systems. Her supervisors valued her careful attention to detail. They never suspected that her maintenance reports contained precise instructions for simultaneously disabling communication infrastructure across thousands of star systems. The elders had made humanity invisible by treating them as furniture. Servants who were present in every critical facility, trusted to operate essential systems, ignored as potential threats because they seemed so thoroughly defeated. Commander Jin maintained her diplomatic status on the conclave station, attending meaningless ceremonial functions and filing reports that reinforced elder assumptions about human psychological patterns. Her apparent depression and resignation were so convincing that Counselor Thys had publicly cited her as an example of successful species integration therapy. Jin's real work happened in the spaces between official duties, using diplomatic communication channels to coordinate with Admiral Choi and the other human leaders. They spoke in coded language that referenced human cultural touchstones the elders had never bothered to study, weaving strategic instructions into seemingly innocent discussions of Earth literature and historical events. The elders monitored these communications, but they heard only the harmless nostalgia of a conquered people reminiscing about their lost homeworld. As the months passed, a curious pattern began to emerge in galactic administrative reports. System efficiency was improving across all sectors. Human workers were exceeding productivity targets. Maintenance schedules were being completed ahead of deadlines. Supply chains were operating with unprecedented smoothness. Elder administrators congratulated themselves on the success of their management techniques. They had transformed a chaotic, emotional species into model galactic citizens. The reality was that humans were learning every detail of how elder civilization functioned. Every component, every system, every process that kept their empire operating was being studied, cataloged, and prepared for systematic dismantlement. Dr. Lee had discovered something that should have terrified any elder who bothered to study the historical data. Previous resistance movements had failed because they tried to destroy elder military forces, which were designed to be indestructible. But elder civilization, like all ancient empires, had grown dependent on complex administrative and technological systems that assumed the cooperation of their subject species. For the first time in millions of years, that assumption was about to be proven wrong. Admiral Choi finished cataloging the spare parts for the orbital platform's primary power systems, noting which components were critical and which were redundant. His elder supervisor praised his thoroughness. Tomorrow, Choi would begin maintenance procedures that would ensure the platform's power grid would fail at precisely the moment when similar failures occurred across 10,000 other installations. Commander Jin attended another ceremonial dinner, listening to elder dignitaries discuss their plans for expanding human labor programs to newly discovered worlds. She nodded politely and expressed appropriate gratitude for their benevolent guidance. Her diplomatic reports would ensure that elder leadership remained focused on managing their successful integration of humanity, rather than questioning why everything seemed to be going so remarkably well. Captain Kim sent routine supply requisitions through channels that appeared to be completely standard administrative communications. Every human leader in the galaxy received confirmation that their preparations were complete. The elders had spent months reshaping humanity into the perfect servants for their cosmic empire. They were about to discover that they had actually trained humanity to destroy them. The uprising began at exactly 1547 Galactic Standard Time on a Tuesday that would be remembered as the day an empire died. Admiral Choi Sung-min entered the routine maintenance code that would shut down the primary power grid on Orbital Platform 7 for standard component replacement. As the massive station's lights dimmed and went dark, emergency systems activated exactly as designed. Elder Administrator Zephys barely noticed the transition to backup power, confident that his efficient human maintenance supervisor would have everything restored within the hour. Zephys would never understand that Choi had just eliminated the primary communications relay for 17 star systems. Across the galaxy, 10,000 similar acts of perfect sabotage occurred within minutes of each other. Factory ship. Kepler's industrial fabricators shut down for what appeared to be scheduled recalibration procedures. Agricultural Station Series experienced a sudden crop contamination that required immediate quarantine protocols. Communications Hub Proxima suffered a quantum relay alignment failure that rendered interstellar communication impossible throughout the sector. Each individual incident appeared to be routine maintenance or unfortunate accident. Together, they constituted the systematic dismantling of galactic civilization. Elder Vorthak was reviewing productivity reports in his private chambers when his personal communications array began displaying error messages. Assuming a simple technical malfunction, he summoned his human technical assistant to resolve the problem. The assistant, Park Hee-young, arrived promptly and began running diagnostic procedures with the same quiet efficiency she had shown for months. "The problem appears to be in the quantum resonance matrix, Elder Vorthak," she reported. "I will need to recalibrate the entire system. This may take several hours." "How inconvenient," Vorthak replied dismissively. "I suppose such interruptions are inevitable when dealing with technology operated by primitive hands." Park nodded respectfully and continued her work. She did not mention that she was installing modifications that would ensure Vorthak's communication system would never function again. The genius of the human strategy lay not in its complexity, but in its psychological design. Dr. Lee Hee-jin had spent months studying elder behavioral patterns, identifying their deepest assumptions about reality. They believed that inferior species could never pose genuine threats to superior ones. They believed that their technological advantages made them inherently invulnerable. They believed that their ancient experience gave them complete understanding of how resistance movements operated. Every one of these beliefs made them blind to what was actually happening around them. On the ethereal conclave station, Counselor Thys was hosting a celebration dinner for visiting dignitaries from the Outer Rim territories. The human catering staff moved through the reception with their usual invisible efficiency, serving delicacies from a dozen worlds, while the guests discussed expansion plans for elder influence in previously unexplored sectors. The conversation was interrupted when the station's environmental systems began malfunctioning. Temperature controls fluctuated wildly. Atmospheric processors cycled between different gas mixtures. Gravity stabilizers created pockets of altered gravitational fields that sent dignified elder officials floating helplessly through the reception hall. "Summon the maintenance supervisor immediately," Thys commanded, her reptilian features flushed with embarrassment. The maintenance supervisor, Li Jin-A, arrived within minutes and began implementing emergency protocols with admirable urgency. "I apologize for this inconvenience, Counselor Thys. The environmental control systems appear to have suffered cascading failures across multiple subsystems. I will need to shut down primary life support and switch to emergency backups while I repair the damage." "How long will this take?" Thys demanded. "Perhaps 6 hours, Counselor. These systems are very complex." Thys dismissed her with an irritated wave. She did not realize that Li was installing modifications that would give humans complete control over life support systems throughout the station. Similar scenes played out on worlds and installations throughout the galaxy. The elders experienced a day of unusual technical difficulties, but each problem was being addressed by competent human technicians who seemed appropriately concerned about restoring normal operations. None of them understood that the humans were systematically taking control of every critical system that kept their civilization functioning. Commander Jin Seo-yun walked through the Conclave's diplomatic quarters, using her access codes to enter secured communication centers, where she uploaded new protocols to the Galactic Administrative Network. Her modifications appeared to be routine updates to human labor assignments and productivity tracking systems. In reality, she was inserting command structures that would allow coordinated human action across the entire galaxy. As she worked, Jin reflected on the psychological warfare that had made this moment possible. The elders had spent months congratulating themselves on successfully breaking human spirit and independence. They interpreted human compliance as evidence of their superior understanding of species management. They saw human efficiency as proof that proper discipline could transform any primitive species into useful servants. They never realized that human cooperation was a choice, not a submission. The true brilliance of Admiral Choi's strategy lay in understanding that the elders could not conceive of resistance that looked like perfect obedience. Their million-year dominance had taught them that inferior species would always reveal their hostility through emotional outbursts, military preparations, or political demands. They had learned to recognize and crush every form of resistance that previous civilizations had attempted. But they had never encountered a species that could maintain perfect coordination while appearing completely defeated. They had never faced opponents who could plan for months without revealing the slightest hint of their true intentions. They had never imagined that emotional intelligence could be weaponized into a form of psychological warfare that made their own cognitive advantages into weaknesses. By evening Galactic Standard Time, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Communication breakdowns affected every major sector. Transportation networks experienced coordinated failures. Industrial production ground to a halt as automated systems across thousands of installations required simultaneous maintenance procedures. Elder administrators began reporting that their human workers seemed unusually busy with repair activities. But their reports indicated appropriate urgency in restoring normal operations. The elders still did not understand what was happening to them. On Agricultural Station Series, Jung Min-ho completed his modifications to the food processing systems. Every meal shipped from the station would now carry nanoscale agents that would gradually degrade elder biological systems while remaining harmless to other species. The process would take months to become noticeable, by which time it would be irreversible. On Communications Hub Proxima, Oh Soo-jin finished installing new routing protocols that gave humans control over all information flow between elder territories. From this moment forward, the elders would only receive the communications that humans decided they should see. On factory ship Kepler, Park Ji-won activated manufacturing protocols that would begin producing materials for human use, while creating false inventory reports to hide the changes. The elders would continue to believe their factories were operating normally while humans built the infrastructure for their own independent civilization. As the day ended, Admiral Choi stood in the darkened control room of Orbital Platform 7, looking out at the stars visible through the massive viewports. Elder Administrator Zephys had retired to his quarters hours ago, confident that routine maintenance would be completed by morning. Choi activated his secured communication array, using frequencies that Elder monitoring systems had been programmed to ignore as irrelevant human chatter. "All stations report successful implementation," he announced. "Phase 1 is complete." Across the galaxy, 10,000 human voices confirmed that humanity had taken the first step toward freedom. The Elders still thought they were in control of a well-managed empire. They would not understand their mistake until it was far too late to correct it. 3 weeks after the coordinated infrastructure failures began, Elder Vorthak finally understood that his empire was dying. The realization came not in a moment of dramatic revelation, but through the slow accumulation of impossible coincidences that could no longer be dismissed as unfortunate accidents. Communication systems that had operated flawlessly for millennia continued to malfunction despite constant human repair efforts. Supply chains that had never failed began experiencing mysterious delays and rerouting errors. Administrative databases developed inexplicable glitches that corrupted critical records. Most disturbing of all, the human workers seemed to be working harder than ever to fix these problems, but somehow nothing they did made any meaningful difference. Vorthak stood in his private chamber, staring at reports that painted a picture his ancient mind struggled to accept. Elder territories throughout the galaxy were experiencing what appeared to be spontaneous technological decay. Power grids failed and could not be fully restored. Manufacturing systems produced materials that met all specifications, but somehow proved unsuitable for their intended purposes. Transportation networks routed cargo to destinations where it was not needed while leaving critical supplies stranded in empty systems. The human workers assigned to address these failures worked with apparent dedication, filing detailed reports about their efforts and requesting additional resources to complete their repairs. Their productivity had never been higher. Their compliance with Elder directives had never been more complete. Yet somehow, everything they touched gradually stopped working properly. Commander Jin Seo-yun sat across from Vorthak in the council chamber, wearing the expression of concerned efficiency that had served her so well over the past months. She was presenting the latest status report on human integration efforts, her voice carrying appropriate deference as she explained the challenges her people faced in maintaining Elder technology. "The quantum resonance systems appear to be more complex than we initially understood," she explained. "Human technicians are working extended shifts to master the intricacies of your advanced engineering, but the learning curve has proven steeper than anticipated. We are requesting additional training resources to improve our competency." Vorthak studied her with eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Something about her explanation felt wrong, but he could not identify what disturbed him about her perfectly reasonable request for more educational support. "How long?" he asked carefully. "Do you estimate it will take for human workers to achieve full competency with our systems?" "Difficult to say, Elder Vorthak. Perhaps another year of intensive training. We want to ensure that our work meets your standards, rather than rushing and causing more problems." The answer was logical, helpful, appropriately humble. It should have satisfied Vorthak completely. Instead, it filled him with a growing sense of dread he could not explain. That evening, Vorthak summoned Counselor Thys to his private chambers for an unprecedented informal consultation. The ancient Saurian arrived to find him staring at holographic displays showing the status of Elder territories across the galaxy. "Something is wrong," Vorthak said without preamble. "I cannot identify what, but something fundamental has changed." Thys studied the displays, her reptilian features creasing with concentration. "The reports show normal operational variations. System failures within acceptable parameters. Human productivity exceeding expectations." "Precisely," Vorthak replied. "Everything appears normal, yet our civilization is collapsing around us." For the first time in her million-year existence, Thys felt genuine uncertainty. "What do you suspect?" "I suspect," Vorthok said slowly, "that we have fundamentally misunderstood what we are dealing with." As if summoned by their conversation, Dr. Lee Hee-jin approached their location in the station's administrative sector. She was carrying data tablets and status reports, the picture of a dedicated scholar working late to compile information for elder leadership. Her presence was so routine that neither Vorthok nor Thys paid attention as she passed through the area surrounding their meeting room. They did not realize that she was using her position to monitor their conversations and transmit intelligence to human resistance leaders throughout the galaxy. "The humans showed emotional distress when we first demonstrated our authority," Thys said thoughtfully. "That reaction seemed consistent with their psychological profiles. But since then, they have been perfect servants," Vorthok concluded. Too perfect. In the weeks that followed, the elders attempted to investigate the systematic failures plaguing their empire. They deployed their most advanced diagnostic systems to analyze the technological problems. They assigned their most experienced administrators to audit human work performance. They implemented additional monitoring protocols to detect any signs of sabotage or coordinated resistance. Every investigation confirmed the same impossible conclusion. The humans were doing exactly what they appeared to be doing, working diligently to maintain elder systems, following orders with exemplary compliance, demonstrating genuine concern when their efforts failed to achieve desired results. Yet somehow, the empire continued to disintegrate. On Agricultural Station Series, Elder Inspector Keithes arrived to personally oversee Jung Min-ho's food production operations. The human farmer greeted the inspection with appropriate nervousness, apologizing preemptively for any shortcomings the inspector might discover. The inspection revealed farming operations that exceeded all efficiency standards. Crop yields were higher than projections. Processing systems operated flawlessly. Distribution networks delivered products exactly where they were needed. Inspector Keithes commended Jung Min-ho for his excellent work and filed a report praising human agricultural management. 3 months later, malnutrition began affecting elder populations throughout that sector of the galaxy. The food was abundant, nutritionally complete, and perfectly safe for consumption by every species except elders, whose biological systems gradually lost the ability to process the nutrients they needed to survive. Admiral Choi Sung-min received regular visits from elder supervisors who wanted to understand why maintenance procedures that seemed perfectly executed were failing to restore normal operations. He welcomed their scrutiny with humble concern, offering to work additional hours and requesting more resources to improve his performance. His dedication impressed every elder who met him. His technical knowledge seemed comprehensive. His willingness to accept responsibility for failures that seemed beyond his control demonstrated admirable character development for a member of a previously rebellious species. The elders began citing him as an example of successful human integration into galactic society. Meanwhile, every system he touched continued its gradual but irreversible decay toward complete failure. The end came not with dramatic battles or political declarations, but with the quiet recognition that an empire built on the assumption of permanent superiority had encountered something it could not understand or control. Commander Jin stood once again in the council chamber, where humanity's fate had been decided months earlier. This time, she was not requesting protection or pleading for consideration. She was addressing the shattered remains of a galactic government that no longer possessed the infrastructure necessary to enforce its will. Elder Vorthok sat alone at the center table, his crystalline form dim and flickering. Most of the other council members had withdrawn to their homeworlds when communications became too unreliable to maintain central coordination. Those worlds, dependent on galactic supply networks that no longer functioned, were experiencing their own quiet catastrophes. "You did this," Vorthok said. It was not an accusation, but a statement of fact delivered with something approaching admiration. "Somehow, you did this." "We didn't destroy anything, Elder Vorthok," Jin replied. "We simply stopped maintaining it. Your empire was built on the assumption that other species would always be willing to operate the systems that kept it functioning. When that assumption proved incorrect, everything else followed naturally. Well, win the more. Win the more. But you appeared to be cooperating. Your people worked harder than ever. We were working, Jin confirmed. For the first time in his ancient existence, Vorthak experienced something humans would recognize as humility. We could have found another way. We could have negotiated. Jin shook her head. You could never have negotiated, because you could never have seen us as equals. Your entire civilization was based on the belief that strength meant the right to dominate others. That belief made it impossible for you to understand that cooperation is stronger than control. Vorthak's form began to collapse in on itself, the energy that had sustained him for millions of years finally exhausting itself. What will happen to us? That depends on you, Jin replied. The new galactic government will be based on consent rather than domination. Every species will have a voice. Every world will have the right to determine its own future. If you can accept that reality, there will be a place for you in what we build. And if we cannot, Jin's expression remained compassionate but implacable. Then you will experience what every other species that challenged your authority experienced. The difference is that we will not disguise it as benevolent guidance. As Vorthak's consciousness faded into the darkness that had always awaited tyrants, he finally understood the fury that human elders had murmured about in ancient legends passed down through generations who had never forgotten that freedom was worth any sacrifice. It was not the fury of rage or vengeance. It was the quiet, implacable fury of people who would never stop building something better, no matter how many times their oppressors knocked it down. Dr. Li He-jin began compiling the historical records that would ensure future generations remembered both the cost of tyranny and the power of those who refused to accept it. Her work would become the foundation for galactic education systems designed to prevent anyone from ever again believing that might made right. The elders who had ruled through fear died not in battle, but in the silence of irrelevance. Their final punishment was not destruction, but the simple recognition that the galaxy had learned to function without them. And in that silence, humanity began building something that had never existed in galactic history. A civilization based on the radical idea that every thinking being deserved the chance to determine their own destiny.